People whispered about the janitor with the tired eyes, but no one ever knew the truth until the day his past walked right into the sunlight and refused to stay buried. The morning of the graduation ceremony had begun like any other for Daniel Reyes, quiet, steady, and heavy in ways he didn't speak about. He woke at 4:45 a.m., as he always did. Years of military discipline never left him, even if the world he lived in now had nothing to do with uniforms, ranks, or orders. The tiny apartment was silent except for the rustling of his daughter's robes hanging on the bathroom door, ready for the moment they'd been dreaming of. The twins, Mia and Lily, were still asleep when he tiptoed past their room. Their beds were messy, books stacked everywhere, hair straighteners left plugged in, and graduation caps decorated with glitter and motivational quotes. He smiled at the chaos. They were 18, but still his little girls, still the babies he'd held with trembling hands in a hospital room while praying their mother would survive long enough to name them. She hadn't. Life had taken her quickly, without mercy, leaving Daniel with 2 infants and a grief so large it swallowed whole pieces of him. But he survived for them. Every breath he'd taken since then was because of them. After making coffee, he sat on the couch, staring at their baby pictures on the wall. He took a sip, wincing. It tasted burnt, bitter. He didn't care. He'd been drinking bad coffee for almost 2 decades. He reached for his work boots, old, cracked, the soles nearly worn thin. As he tied the laces, he noticed how his knuckles had become scarred over time, how his hands had become tools more than parts of him. Those hands had scrubbed floors, changed light bulbs, repaired broken doors, held crying children, and carried both twins on each shoulder when they were small enough to fit there. Today, he promised himself, would be about them, not him, never him. At 6 a.m., he walked to the school, long before students, teachers, or parents would begin arriving. The principal had insisted he didn't have to come in early, but Daniel preferred the stillness. It gave him time to breathe before the emotional storm he knew graduation would bring. When he reached the campus, the football field was still empty, except for rows of folding chairs glistening with morning dew. He stood there for a moment, watching the sun rise behind the bleachers. Gold flooded the sky, warming the horizon. It looked like a new beginning, almost like hope. But Daniel didn't allow himself hope. He went inside the school to do one final sweep of the halls. Even though he wasn't on duty today, he had taken the morning off. He couldn't help himself. Janitorial work had become more than a job. It was a responsibility, a ritual, something that filled the hours and distracted his mind from memories that clawed at him in the silence. He cleaned the entryway, polishing the trophy case where countless shiny awards were displayed. He paused at the photo of last year's graduating class and wondered how many parents had stood proudly for their children. Some probably bought expensive suits or pretty dresses, arranged big family dinners, had money for balloons and flowers. He had nothing to offer his daughters except the life he had fought for them to have, a life where they could graduate without worrying about bills, hunger, or danger. Around 8 a.m., teachers began arriving. Some greeted him kindly, some barely noticed him. Daniel didn't mind. People saw what they wanted to see, a janitor in faded clothes pushing a cart of cleaning supplies. No one wondered why his posture remained straight, why his eyes scanned crowds instinctively, or why sudden, loud noises still made him flinch. No one knew the past he carried. By 10 a.m., the campus was buzzing with life. Cars began filling the parking lot. Students in gowns hurried around taking final pictures. The air smelled of perfume, flowers, and youthful excitement. Daniel returned home to shower and change. He didn't have new clothes. He never bought clothes for himself unless absolutely necessary, but he wore his cleanest pair of jeans and a shirt that wasn't faded yet. Before leaving, he stopped at the mirror. His face carried years of exhaustion, hair peppered with gray, jaw covered with light stubble. He looked older than his age, older than most of the parents who would be there today. Still, his daughters loved him exactly like this. When he returned to the school around noon, the bleachers were filled with families. The crowd was loud but joyful, the sound of hundreds of hearts bursting with pride. Daniel moved slowly, staying behind the bleachers out of sight. He didn't want the girls to feel embarrassed by his presence. He knew how cruel high school kids could be. When they were younger, some classmates teased the twins for having a janitor father. The girls always defended him, but Daniel saw the anger in their eyes, the hurt they tried to hide. He didn't want to cause them more. He found a spot behind the bleachers, resting against the railing as he watched the stage. The air smelled of sunscreen, fresh grass, and the slight burn of barbecue smoke drifting in from someone tailgating in the parking lot. Then the music began, pomp and circumstance, a song he'd heard 1,000 times in movies but never in real life. The students began filing in, and then he saw them. Mia and Lily walked side by side, identical in height, posture, and smile, though their personalities couldn't have been more different. Mia, bold and outgoing, waved excitedly at the crowd. Lily, quieter and more thoughtful, held her diploma folder as if she was afraid to drop it. The moment they spotted him, even from a distance, they turned, searched, and found him instantly. And something warm, something overwhelming, filled his chest. Their smiles, those smiles were worth every night he'd worked, every meal he'd skipped, every time he'd swallowed his pride and taken a job other men mocked. He lifted his hand in a small wave. His throat tightened. He had promised himself he wouldn't cry today, but seeing those little girls, now women, walk with such pride made his vision blur. He shifted, wiping his eyes discreetly, and in doing so, his sleeve rolled up slightly. The tattoo peeked out, the edges of the eagle, globe, and anchor. A symbol burned into him long before his daughters took their first breath. He tugged the sleeve down quickly, instinctively. No one here knew about that past. He had kept it hidden for 17 years. There were no medals on his walls, no pictures of him in uniform, no mention of what happened overseas. That life was gone. He didn't have the luxury of nostalgia. He had 2 daughters to raise, but the universe had other plans for him that day. Someone nearby gasped sharply, a sound so abrupt that Daniel's instincts, his Marine instincts, snapped awake. He turned. A man stood there frozen mid-step, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a perfectly pressed Marine Corps dress uniform. Medals glittered across his chest. His white cap cast a sharp shadow over his eyes, but nothing could hide the shock spreading across his face. He wasn't old, maybe mid-30s, younger than Daniel had been when he left the military. His jaw trembled slightly, as if he were seeing something impossible. His gaze dropped to Daniel's arm. The tattoo. Daniel clenched his teeth. He forced his sleeve down again. Too late. The captain whispered, "No, no way." Daniel blinked. He didn't recognize him. He didn't recognize anyone from that time. Trauma had erased faces, voices, names, everything except the screams and explosions. The captain stepped closer, slowly, like he was approaching something sacred. "Staff Sergeant Reyes?" he breathed. "Sir, is that really you?" Daniel froze. His heart pounded so loudly he could feel it in his teeth. No one had called him that, Staff Sergeant, since the day he crawled out of the rubble in Fallujah, with blood filling his mouth and 3 broken ribs cutting into his lungs. He hadn't heard that title in nearly 2 decades. He swallowed hard. "You must be mistaken." The captain shook his head. "I'd know you anywhere." "I'm not." Daniel started, but the captain cut him off. "You saved my life." Daniel's knees weakened for a moment. "Saved your life." Those words slammed into him like a punch. He shook his head again, voice raspy. "I'm just a janitor." "Sir," the captain whispered, emotion thick in his throat, "you dragged me out of the collapsing building. Your arm was bleeding. You carried me, a full-grown Marine, through enemy fire. I remember your voice shouting at us to get down. I remember you covering us when the second explosion hit." Daniel winced as if the memory itself caused physical pain. Those memories weren't stories, they were wounds. The captain swallowed, stepping even closer. "We were told you died, that you didn't make it out after the final blast. They sent us home believing you were gone." Daniel looked away. The weight of those words felt unbearable. He had disappeared, intentionally. He didn't want pity. He didn't want medals or speeches or folded flags. He wanted to be a father. "I'm not that man anymore," Daniel murmured. "I don't want to be—" The captain shook his head fiercely. "With respect, sir, you'll always be him." Daniel's chest tightened. Panic stirred, crawling up his throat. Not here. Not today. He didn't want this attention. The crowd was starting to notice something unusual happening. Heads turned. Whispers grew. He stepped back, lowering his voice. "Please, my daughters, they don't know. They only know me as their dad. That's something to be proud of, too, the captain whispered. Daniel closed his eyes. He wished he could disappear again into the shadows behind the bleachers. He wished he could protect his daughters from the weight of his past the same way he had protected them from hunger, from fear, from the world. But the past had found him, and it wasn't going to let go. The captain's voice softened. Sir, they deserve to know the truth. No, Daniel said sharply. They deserve a father, not a ghost of a soldier. The captain didn't argue. Instead, he looked at Daniel with a mixture of reverence and heartbreak. I never forgot your face, he whispered. Not even once in 17 years. Daniel could barely breathe. You shouldn't have remembered me, he replied quietly. I'm nobody now. But the captain shook his head slowly, firmly, like a man refusing to let history be rewritten. You're a hero, he said. Daniel clenched his jaw. He hated that word. Hero. Heroes were the ones who didn't come home. Heroes were the ones whose names were carved into memorials. Heroes were the ones he lost. He was just the one who survived. And surviving didn't feel like heroism. It felt like punishment. The captain looked as if he wanted to say more, but the graduation announcer's voice rang out loudly across the field. Students, please take your seats. Daniel glanced toward the stage. Mia and Lily were already sitting, adjusting their gowns, nudging each other excitedly. They had no idea what was happening behind them. They had no idea their father's past was standing 10 feet away, staring at him like he'd risen from the dead. The captain followed Daniel's gaze. Your daughters? He asked softly. Daniel nodded. They're beautiful, the captain said. Strong, smart, they look proud. They should be, Daniel whispered. They've been through more than most kids ever will. And they had you, the captain replied quietly. Daniel didn't answer. He didn't know how. The ceremony was about to begin. The world was moving forward. But Daniel felt stuck, caught between who he had been and who he needed to be now. The captain took one step back, then paused. Sir, he said with a voice that carried both respect and sorrow, if you want me to leave this alone, I will. But if you'll let me, I'd like the world to know what you did. Daniel's breath caught. The world. He shook his head weakly. Not today. The captain nodded. But fate wasn't done with them. Not by a long shot. Because this was only the beginning. And Daniel Reyes was about to learn that no matter how far you run, the truth has a way of marching right back, saluting you with the force of an entire lifetime. Daniel had spent nearly 2 decades running from memories he never wanted to revisit. But as he stood behind the bleachers with the Marine captain staring at him like a resurrected legend, he felt the past knocking harder than ever, loud, relentless, unavoidable. The ceremony began with the principal's long, overly rehearsed speech about perseverance, unity, dreams, and futures shaped by hard work. Parents clapped politely, students fidgeted, teachers pretended to be moved. But Daniel didn't hear a word of it. He was too focused on the tightness in his chest, the way the captain kept glancing back at him from the corner of the field, and the fear, raw and unfamiliar, that his daughters might somehow discover the truth today, when all he wanted was for their moment to shine. He pressed his hand over the tattoo, as if trying to hide the entire past beneath his palm. But the memories didn't care. They crashed into him without mercy. The dust, the fire, the feeling of lifting another man's body while his own limbs bled. The sound of his own voice shouting, "Move, move!" The world collapsing behind him. He inhaled sharply, grounding himself. Not now, not here, not with his daughters watching. The principal finally called the first row of graduates. Mia and Lily were seated in the second-to-last row, which meant Daniel had to wait almost 20 minutes before their names would be called. He tried to focus on them, tried to let the sight of their bright smiles drown out the storm inside his mind. But then the captain approached him again, slowly, carefully, as if afraid he would run. Sir, the captain said gently, I don't want to make this day harder for you. Daniel kept his eyes fixed on the stage. Then don't. Let them have their moment. They will, the captain replied. But I can't just pretend I didn't see you. You were our leader. You carried us. When half the squad panicked, you didn't. You were the reason we survived. Daniel didn't look at him. Why are you here? My nephew is graduating, the captain answered. He's one of the top students. Daniel nodded slowly, still refusing to meet his gaze. And you? The captain asked softly. Why are you standing all the way back here? Daniel hesitated. His voice came out low. "I don't want to embarrass my daughters." The captain flinched as if struck. "Embarrass them? Sir, you—" "Stop calling me sir." Daniel's voice was sharper than he intended. "I'm not your staff sergeant anymore. I'm a janitor, that's all." The captain's jaw tensed. "With respect, you don't get to choose how others remember you." Daniel didn't respond. He couldn't, because deep down, he feared the captain was right, but he didn't want his daughter's spotlight overshadowed. They had worked too hard. Late nights studying, early mornings practicing presentations, saving every dollar for college applications. Both girls had been accepted to universities he could barely afford, but they insisted on applying for scholarships, knowing how tight money had been. He was proud of them, more than of anything he had ever done in his life. When the graduates shifted rows and Mia's row stood, Daniel felt his heart thump harder. This was it, her moment. But then, out of the corner of his eye, he saw the captain move toward the principal, whispering something, urgent, important. Daniel's breath caught. He shook his head softly, trembling. "No, not now. Please, not today." But the captain didn't look back. Mia climbed the stage steps, smiling brightly as she accepted her diploma. She turned her head just slightly, searching the crowd. When her eyes found Daniel again, her face glowed with pure pride. Then came Lily, sweet, quiet Lily, who always walked a step behind her sister, but had a brilliant mind sharper than most adults Daniel knew. She tucked her hair behind her ear, took a deep breath, and went up when her name was called. Daniel felt tears stream down his cheeks before he could stop them. His little girls, his whole world. He was so lost in the moment that he almost didn't notice what happened next. The principal returned to the microphone, but the captain now stood beside him, straight, tall, and unmissable in his Marine uniform. A hush fell over the crowd. Students turned. Parents murmured. Daniel's stomach twisted painfully. "Please don't do this," he begged silently. "Please, let this be their day." The principal cleared his throat. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have an unexpected announcement." Daniel's breath stopped. Mia and Lily froze in their seats, glancing at each other in confusion. The captain took the microphone. His voice carried across the entire field. "Today we honor these students," he began, "but we also honor someone else, a man who has quietly given more to this school, to this community, and to this country than any of us realized." Daniel felt his heart pounding so loudly he thought people could hear it. "He stands among you," the captain continued. "Not as a decorated Marine, not as a war hero, but as a humble father who sacrificed everything so his daughters could stand on this field today." Mia and Lily turned around sharply, eyes scanning, searching. The captain's eyes locked on Daniel. "Staff Sergeant Daniel Reyes," the captain said, voice trembling with emotion, "is alive, and he is here." Gasps erupted through the crowd. Teachers stood. Students whispered. Cameras pointed toward Daniel. He shook his head, taking a step back. No, not like this. He wasn't ready. But the captain continued, voice firm and unwavering. "This man carried me out of a collapsing building in Fallujah. He shielded me from gunfire with his own body. He was reported dead because he refused to leave the battlefield until every one of us made it out." The crowd went silent, completely silent. Mia's and Lily's mouths hung open. Daniel closed his eyes tightly. He felt exposed, vulnerable, terrified, not of judgment, but of the truth being a burden to his daughters. "They deserve to know," the captain said gently, turning his head toward Daniel. "The world deserves to know." The principal handed the captain a small box, one Daniel hadn't seen in 17 years, the Purple Heart, one that had never been delivered because everyone thought he never came home to receive it. "This belongs to you," the captain said softly. Daniel shook his head again, voice cracking. "I don't need that." "But your daughters do," the captain whispered. "They deserve to know what kind of father raised them with so much love." Mia abruptly stood from her seat. Lily followed. They stepped off the stage, gowns fluttering behind them, walking toward the back of the field where their father stood frozen in place. The captain stepped aside. The twins stopped right in front of him. Their eyes were full of disbelief, confusion, and something else, something deeper. "Dad," Mia whispered, "is it true?" Daniel swallowed hard, unable to speak. Lily's voice trembled, tears already falling. Why didn't you tell us? Daniel finally found his voice, choked and fragile. Because I wanted you to grow up loving who I am now, not who I used to be. The crowd watched silently. The captain stood tall, proud. The twins stood before him, waiting. Daniel hesitated, tears streaming freely now. I didn't want my past to be your burden. Mia reached out and grabbed his hand tightly. Dad, your past is our pride. Lily nodded through her tears. We love every version of you. Daniel's legs gave out, and he sank to his knees as the weight of years, pain, guilt, trauma, love, finally broke open. His daughters immediately knelt with him, wrapping their arms around him. He felt their warmth, their tears, their love. And for the first time in 17 years, Daniel allowed himself to be held. Above them, the captain saluted him, sharp, steady, respectful. Daniel looked up through blurry vision and returned the salute, slowly, painfully, proudly. Because for the first time, he felt like he deserved it. And this wasn't the end. This was the beginning of a truth that could no longer remain hidden. But the story, his story, was far from over. The moment Daniel returned the captain's salute, something shifted in the air, something heavy, something sacred, something that felt like a lifetime finally exhaling. The entire stadium was silent, as if every person there understood that they were witnessing not just a graduation but a resurrection. The twins stayed wrapped around him until he finally rose to his feet. His knees trembled, but his daughters held on to him like anchors, steadying him in a world he hadn't felt steady in for almost 2 decades. His heart thumped violently, not from fear this time, but from something he hadn't felt since before the war. Belonging. Mia wiped her tears and sniffled loudly. Dad, you saved lives, and you've been sweeping school hallways this whole time? Daniel nodded weakly. The world doesn't owe me anything. You two are all I ever needed. Lily stared at him as though seeing a new version of him and recognizing he was still the same dad beneath it all. But you lived like your life didn't matter. Daniel cupped her cheek gently. My life did matter. It mattered to both of you, and that was enough for me. The captain stepped forward, emotion written in every line of his face. If you'll allow it, Staff Sergeant. There's more I need to say. Daniel exhaled. I'd rather you call me Daniel. The captain's lips twitched into a small smile. Daniel, then let me honor you as a man, not a Marine. He motioned toward a principal, who unpinned a second ribbon box, one even more significant than the Purple Heart. Inside was the Navy and Marine Corps Commendation Medal with Combat Distinguishing Device. Mia's hand flew over her mouth. Lily gasped softly. Daniel stiffened. I don't want that. It was awarded to you posthumously, the captain said, because we believed you died shielding us. We carried the guilt of surviving without you for years. This medal isn't just yours. It belongs to every man you saved, including me. Daniel felt the ground sway beneath him. He whispered, Please, don't do this. Why? The captain asked gently. Because I don't want my daughters to look at me differently. Mia grabbed his arm. Dad, you're still the man who taught us to ride bikes. Lily hugged him again. The man who packed our lunches and stayed up late helping with science projects. You're the dad, Mia said, voice breaking, who walked to work in the rain so we could use the car during exams. You're our hero, Lily finished. Daniel closed his eyes. The words melted into places he'd kept frozen for years. But the captain wasn't finished. He turned to the crowd. For almost 2 decades, this school has had a quiet guardian, a man who served this country with honor, then served this community with humility. Many of you passed him every day without realizing the depth of his sacrifice. People began standing, one row, then another, a slow wave of respect rising across the stadium, a standing ovation for a janitor, for a Marine, for a father. Daniel stood frozen in place, stunned, overwhelmed. His hands trembled violently, not from fear, not from flashbacks, but from something he almost didn't recognize. Acceptance. The captain stepped aside and nodded at the twins. Girls, take your dad to the stage. Mia and Lily each grabbed one of his arms, pulling him forward gently. He resisted at first, shaking his head. No, this is your day. It still is, Lily whispered. Sharing it with you makes it even better. They led him down the aisle as the entire field clapped and cheered. Some parents cried, some saluted, some held hands over their hearts, Teachers who had barely said 2 words to him over the years looked ashamed for never asking who this quiet janitor really was. When Daniel reached the stage, the captain placed the medal around his neck and stepped back, eyes shining. "Welcome home, Staff Sergeant." The words hit Daniel like a lightning bolt straight to the heart. Home, something he never thought he'd feel again. The applause roared. Students stood on chairs. Phones recorded everything. Daniel swallowed hard, gripping the podium as he tried to steady himself. He didn't want to speak, not because he had nothing to say, but because he didn't trust his voice. But the twins squeezed his hands encouragingly. So he breathed deeply, and he spoke. "I'm not a hero," he began softly, but the microphone carried his voice across the entire field. "I'm just a man who made it home when many didn't. I didn't tell my daughters the truth because I didn't want them growing up with fear or pain. I wanted them to grow with hope, with strength, with love." The stadium was silent again. He continued, voice shaky but growing stronger. "I took a job as a janitor because I needed work that let me take care of my girls. I didn't care about titles. I cared about being there for them, watching them grow, making sure they had what I didn't." Mia cried openly. Lily held his arm tighter. Daniel exhaled shakily. "Today isn't about me. It's about my daughters. They've seen me at my lowest, but they still loved me. They still believed in me. And today, they gave me the courage to stop hiding." He paused, letting the words settle. "I'm proud of who I was," he said quietly, "but I'm even more proud of who they've become." The crowd erupted again, louder than before. When Daniel stepped off the stage, dozens of parents and students approached him, shaking his hand, thanking him, hugging him. Some apologized for ever overlooking him. Others simply stood in awe. But it was when Mia and Lily finally pulled him away from the crowd that Daniel felt the real weight of the moment. The twins walked him to the empty field behind the bleachers, away from the chaos. The sun had dipped lower, casting long shadows across the grass. The wind was gentle. Birds chirped from nearby trees. For the first time all day it was quiet. Mia turned to him. "Dad, can we ask something?" Daniel nodded nervously. Lily spoke first. "Are you okay?" The question pierced him deeper than anything else that day. He opened his mouth, closed it, then opened it again. I don't know." Mia stepped closer. "You don't have to be okay alone anymore." Daniel felt tears burn his eyes. "I didn't want to burden you." Lily cupped his face. "Dad, loving you is never a burden." He broke, truly broke, not in weakness, but in release. He pulled his daughters into his arms, holding them as tightly as he had the night their mother died. When he'd promised them he would never leave them, never fail them, never let the world hurt them. And now, after nearly losing himself to the weight of silence and secrets, he realized he didn't have to carry everything alone anymore. After a while, Mia wiped her cheeks and smiled through tears. "So, hero dad, what do we do now?" Daniel chuckled softly, shaking his head at the nickname. "We get ice cream, like we always do after school events." Lily grinned. "Even today? Especially today," Daniel answered. The twins wrapped their arms around him again as they walked toward the parking lot. The captain watched from a distance, arms crossed, pride written all over his face. He didn't approach. He didn't need to. He just gave Daniel one final nod. A salute of understanding, of respect, of closure. Daniel returned the nod. Then he turned to his daughters, his real legacy. They climbed into the old car, laughing, talking over each other like they always did. For the first time since the war, the ache in Daniel's chest wasn't from loss. It was from love, from peace, from finally being seen. As they pulled out of the parking lot, Mia turned on the radio. Lily reached for his hand, and Daniel Reyes, once a staff sergeant, now a father finally free from hiding, whispered to himself, "I'm home," and for the first time in 17 years, he truly meant it.